communities in the United Kingdom with greater impacts and create the platform to hear your silent and unheard views in this hugely growing community in the United Kingdom. Our channel, Ben TV, presents to you another live current affairs television program. Our focus on the program is to review and discuss issues around the diaspora community in the UK. The program offers you that unrestricted voice on issues affecting you in the UK. Join us live every Monday at 10 a.m. to 12 noon. Thank you for joining us on the program. The program is Dialogue in Diaspora. Coming to you live from Ben Television. My name is Steve Delap. It's a pleasure to have you. Today on the show, we will be having two segments. The first segment, we'll be talking about Brexit and Britain. The future of Britain with Brexit. It's no news that the government, the Prime Minister Theresa May, will be triggering Article 50 any moment from now. She has said she'll be triggering that article by the last week of this month of March 2017, and that will kickstart a 2-year negotiation of Britain leaving the European Union. But quite a lot of people have been, some have been very pessimistic, some have been optimistic. And of course, Brexit is not news that is actually divided Britain with Scotland, saying, look, our people voted to remain in the EU, massively voted to remain in the EU. Now that the rest of UK is saying they're leaving, we want to leave the United Kingdom. The Constitution is calling for a referendum, and of course, Prime Minister Theresa May said, look, this is not the moment to do that. So we're probably looking at a possible fractured United Kingdom with Brexit. But what does this really mean for our economy and for you in terms of job, in terms of housing, in terms of NHS, in terms of the number of people coming into the UK? These are the issues we're taking a look at on the show today. And my guest that will be joining me to discuss this and many more is Antonia Bright. Antonia Bright, activist. She'll be joining us. She's already here, and she'll be speaking more about a couple of these issues. And of course, she'll be discussing the issue of racism, institutional racism in both private and public places, and how this is damaging who we are and what we represent in Britain. Antonia, thank you for joining us on the program today. Thank you for taking your time out of this early morning to be part of the program. All right, and the second segment of the program, I'll be joined by Awula Sawa and Kwaku. We'll be talking about the African identity and the failure of slave masters. Here, we'll be taking a look at the issue of the identity of Africans as who we are, as what was supposed to be Africans in the diaspora in the United Kingdom, and of course our roles and what damage or not really caused by so-called slave masters, and of course the empire itself. So I'll be joined by Awula Shewa and Kwaku on the program in the course of the show. And we'll also open the phone line for you to be part of the program. You can join us on the show today to call in and also have your opinion. In fact, we're opening the phone line straight. The number to call in is 020-888-0693, and you can join the program. Let us have your opinion. How do you think Brexit will affect you? What impact do you think Brexit is going to be on you? The impact on your economy, on your finances, on housing, on your future. You can join us on the program. Welcome to the program. Tonya, pleasure. Tell us quickly, let's review Brexit. As it were, where do we stand?
I mean, the main thing to understand about Brexit as a policy is that it is an anti-immigrant policy. That is the biggest feature of Brexit. It's the driving force why they came to having a referendum in the first place. And the result of it is the result of years and years and, successive governments scapegoating immigrants and giving a message to citizens that if you're, the reason that you're struggling, the reason that you're insecure, housing crisis, NHS, any other thing, that the reason's immigration, and blaming immigration for the problems using it, as it embodies the kind of fears and insecurities. It's not a solution. It won't put a roof over anyone's head. But blaming immigration has been like the main tool utilized, and that's what we've seen. So that's why we saw after the referendum a 41% spike in hate crime, violent attacks happening. We experienced members being abused, on a bus, in a shop, told to go to the back of the queue because we voted you out of here. So in people's minds, this is, we voted you out, that it was an anti-immigrant policy and expression. And I think that, I understand people voted, they may have many reasons to explain their vote, but the overall outcome is still anti-immigration. And we see it.
One of the reasons will probably be those who voted to leave will not say this is an anti-immigration policy or idea or belief. They'll say to you, we just want to have a control of our border. And every country, every nation has a right to determine who comes in and who goes out. As it is now in Britain, they don't seem to have a control. And they say, look, we just want to have a control of our border. Is that anti-immigration?
But that's exactly it. It is about immigration. It's not really about the economy
does
or
Britain
other
not
things.
really have the right to say, look, we want to determine who comes into our country or who does not?
I think we need to remember that Britain has been in every other country. I mean, Britain has a relationship to countries around the world precisely because it has gone there. And for bad reasons, but there is a good side, is that it also means Britain itself is very integrated. Like, we grow up in communities and families who are very mixed from around the world for that reason. And that also means that when we look at the results in Brexit, overwhelmingly the younger generation voted Remain. There is a sense that rejecting the idea that immigration is a problem, but appreciating, in fact, like, this is the most integrated generation. You have friends from all different places. You don't feel any problem from that. There isn't a problem from that. That's a good way for the society to be. It's more worldly, it's like forward-looking, and it has a relationship to the rest of the world that can be positive. Brexit was kind of the strongest leave votes were in the places that had the least integration, and there's more of a sense that immigration is something to be suspicious of or fear or see as a danger or see as something that's changing a culture or something. And this is what the politicians were feeding into. And they're really the ones who are guilty of that, like feeding into the fears and so on. We do that because as a result, it is the reason that we're now seeing a situation where there's there's been more hate crime. Like I say, I mean, we have members, in different places around the country. There was somewhere in Nottingham where people were going knocking on people's doors saying, oh, do you want us to help you pack?
Wow.
Because they literally felt like, well, we voted you out, so now you'll have to leave. It gave a boost to the far right. And it's not that everyone who voted that way would do that or think that, but it gave a confidence to everyone who does feel that way, who is racist, to feel like you can be more open and that it's the people's will. So you're now having permission in a way to say anything to somebody on a street, in a shop, on a bus, and be abusive. The politicians have a lot to answer for because they haven't shown the backbone to defending immigrant rights. There haven't been the strong fight to say that no more immigration controls. That isn't the problem. What we need is policies to alleviate the poverty and the austerity. We have to turn that around. That's what needs to happen.
Two issues here. Alleviating poverty, turning the poor economic turnaround, and the issue of control of poverty. Now, in the Brexit bill, while the parliament voted, well, the government did not enshrine in the bill the right, did not guarantee the right of Europeans even after Brexit. And the House of Lords voted it down, passed an amendment saying, look, for the Europeans that are here, let's guarantee their right. Return to the parliament. They voted it out without amendment. Does that give a voice to these fear-mongering ideas of, look, we don't want you here because the government will not even guarantee the Europeans even after Brexit?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people who feel an enormous betrayal, and it's people who previously generally hadn't had necessarily an immigration problem. Because you can be from a lot of different countries, but if you're from the EU, you can move around the EU quite freely. And so that wasn't, there's people who have actually grown up here, but maybe still have their German passport or another passport, who are being told, well, you have to leave. Or, there's been people getting letters from the Home Office because people are then worrying and like, do I have to regularize my status? And then go through residence applications for permanent residence and things, which previously would never have crossed their mind. And then if you apply for something, obviously you can be turned down. There was an enormous number being turned down. And you feel like, but I've lived here like maybe my whole adult life. I've worked here and all the rest of it. And I suddenly don't feel safe, like I don't belong. And maybe I'm being told I have to leave. The NHS has been noticeably losing an enormous amount of staff as a result. But we don't need to think that, that the same won't be true beyond. I mean, if you're from outside the EU, there already has been a hostile environment towards immigration, and Theresa May was in charge of it as Home Secretary. So mass deportations, criminalizations, new criminal offences being introduced that target people who are from outside the EU. So if you don't have the right papers, driving a car or working a job became a criminal offence for the first time. And far more heightened level of general harassment, so insisting on more people to check passports. So if you're from outside the EU, you're being checked all the time. Even if you have the right papers, you're being asked all the time if you need health care, or if you're a student, you have to register or keep proving your status as a matter of course. So it becomes ordinary to be under a kind of suspicion all the time. That hostile environment already existed for people from outside the EU. What we have now is it's just that it's sweeping up even more people, and I guess in a way we have to look at that as a moment to unite the struggles that the people from Africa, from Asia, from South America, other places have already been struggling with, to now say, well, if you're from the EU, you've got to understand that fight and you've got to be part of it. You've got to support people from other places, because if you now feel under threat, the best allies you have are the people who have already been struggling and succeeding in a lot of cases against that threat, and building a movement in a community where people support each other and don't treat each other with the kind of suspicion that the government's imposing.
I mean, the fear of this, the threat of racism is becoming, I mean, from activists as yours, becoming real. You attended just an anti-racism protest a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I mean, every year is the UN Anti-Racism Day.
Do we really have that problem in the UK?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, sure. And it's getting sharper. And it comes in a lot of different forms. I think that the anti-Muslim bigotry has been really increasing as well, and it's a way of dealing with people as if you're all outsiders. But yeah, anti-immigrant bigotry has grown. Like I say, there's a number of policies that have embedded it as a matter of policy, insisting that doctors and nurses act as immigration police, like view their patient as somebody, that they have to check, rather than just as another human being who's a patient who needs health care. Or teachers, I mean, they're asking parents now.
No, but before you go to education, let's stay on the health. If the government saying, look, our health system facilities have been abused by people who embark on health tourism, they come to the UK, enjoy our facilities for free without they having the rights to it, and they leave our NHS with a huge amount of debt. And the government says, look, we've got to be sure you've got the right to enjoy these facilities. Would we say the government is wrong?
One of the ways that the government has approached the question of how their policies have diminished the health service is to create a problem to point to as the place to blame. So then they start talking about health tourism and create a problem, create it as if it's all these outsiders who you don't know, all these strangers who are getting something that you're not getting. So you can blame them for why you're not getting the right health care. And then it's very efficiently distracts people from the reality that the healthcare has been under attack, has been gradually privatized, like privatization's been creeping in. And Britain is not a poor country, and there is money to put into the healthcare service. But you create a problem so that people can blame that problem instead of looking at and fighting with the real issues. So no, I mean, people, to be quite honest, the healthcare service has been propped up by migrant labour. People working in the healthcare have come from around the world. They've been plugging the gaps when Britain has not been developing those skills, and is now in a crisis of shortage of nurses, and they need more nurses to come in. But when they have nurses from Philippines, from Caribbean, from Nigeria, from other places come in, have been filling those gaps and holding up that service. And yet we're being told, no, immigrants are the reason that the service is in a crisis, instead of the reason that there's any way that the service is being propped up and being kept going. International students pay enormous sums of money to come here, and then they have to pay on top now an NHS surcharge as well. And so whether you're going to use the health service or not, you're paying for it. I mean, people, it's not cheap to come to Britain. It costs a lot. It costs a lot financially and emotionally, and it's not, immigration's really in no way the blame for any of these things, but I do think there's a reason that the government blames immigration, because it really does feed on a kind of a fear and suspicion of something. People can say, well, these are strangers, and if it's strangers, then you don't feel under any obligation.
You were making reference to schools the other time. I mean, it's not stories that children are actually struggling to get into school places nearby, and as whatever policy government puts in place, one will imagine those policies are meant to help children be in the right school places nearby.
Well, we know, I mean...
But then the government is coming under criticism again.
Well, they're under criticism about the whole grammar school project, which is a selective education process. That's not general education. I mean, if there's a problem with school places, why were schools being closed down? Or, if there's a problem with school places, the answer is to build more schools. So the crisis isn't coming from immigration again, but it is being blamed. But now what they're asking for is parents to give data on their children's nationalities, or for every child they're trying to get, families who are under no obligation to do it, but they're being asked for data on all nationalities, which means that there will be a way to trace through. And it's kind of setting up people in the future who can then be targeted over immigration. I think that all these problems, if immigration gets involved, makes every problem worse. If it's healthcare, if you bring in immigration controls and blaming immigration, it makes the problem worse. It means that there's people who won't go for treatment because they're worried that they have to go through all these checks and be harassed and questioned. So then what does that mean? More illness still in the community. People continue to suffer through illness rather than get treatment. Children deserve education. You have a right to education It doesn't matter where you were born. You have a right to an education, and the society needs you to be educated, needs young people to have the opportunity and the optimism to have to have a control of their future. And it means you need an education. You educate everyone in your society. If you start introducing all these different tiers for who has a right, then we're going down the road of tyranny. We're going down a road of segregation, of racism, of like, I think I deserve because against someone else, rather than that we all deserve. It is a poison. It's a poison, and we don't need to go down that path. And like I say, Britain's not a poor country.
Well, some of those policies being carried out by Britain and the government, the conservative government, if you look around the world now, America, the last anybody who ever thought was Donald Trump becoming a president on the ground of, look, America first. Netherlands just had an election over the weekend by stroke of luck. If not, the right wing will have won the anti-Muslim, anti-immigration. So France, Le Pen is growing in Germany. So across the West, we've got this right-wing nationalist campaign growing up.
Yeah.
Evolving strongly. Because people really want to take control of their destiny, of their country. Should anybody blame them?
If we're talking about the rise of the far right, because the rise of fascism is the real problem across Europe, the rise of the far right, and their objective is really crushing social movements, progressive movements, women's movements, anti-racist movements, trade union movements, workers. That's what they do. And so they blame in some part, the billionaires. Well, okay, but Trump is a billionaire. He isn't the ordinary person on the street who's struggling, but he can say what he says to try to appeal to the fear, the base fears, not to educate, not based on anything honest, not on any reality, but on the base fears, to whip up that racism and division. And that movement, that's where we see the violence on the street. We had an assassination in Britain. I mean, when was the last time a politician, an MP, was killed on the street, and by somebody shouting, "Britain first"? Britain first. Nationalist, ultra-nationalist, racist, fascist. Where is that being spurred on from? Yeah, there's despair and fear. It's never an excuse. Even if you're feeling like you're having a hard time in life, it is never an excuse to blame immigrants or throw someone else under the bus. Do you know what I mean? That's not a solution to your problems. It's not to say that there aren't the problems or that the insecurity and fear isn't there, but it's not an excuse to throw immigrants under the bus. If we go down that road, we're going to have a very torn society, and we're going to see a lot more of those racist attacks that we've already been seeing. But the solution there is, and there has to be, an optimistic movement that's basing itself on anti-racism, and that is fighting against the poverty and austerity that we're experiencing.
Isn't that supposed to be the role of the opposition party in government? I mean, and is the opposition really doing that?
But they're not. I mean, they're really not. I mean, it needed to be said from when the referendum result came in, no more immigration controls, and that we're going to start on the basis that we do defend the freedom of movement of people. Goods and services can come and go across borders. Capital can come and go across borders. Objects, tables and chairs, like wherever you can get a good price, you can trade them there. But it's people who can't. It's only people that are restricted labour. So when Britain wants labour, then they'll open up, come in. But we'll keep you in an unstable status. So when we're ready and we don't want you anymore, then you can go. but we're human beings. We don't just work. We make our lives socially. We make our lives where we are. We build our family, friends, community, all of that. So it's not about just, oh, well, we needed you before, but now we don't need you anymore. You can go. Britain's become an integrated, mixed country. And so the only way to undo that would be really through fascist violence. I mean, it would take brutally gathering people in camps and throwing people out physically. It would be, this is where it comes back down to the question of fascism. So for the people who are arguing we're losing our culture or whatever it is, that's where that argument is going. We have to resist that. We can't accept that. And it's, I feel like these are always international questions, and the nationalism of the politics is kind of if we just cut ourselves off from the rest of the world, will we be better off? But it's not true. It kind of feeds, I guess it's a direction of war as well. These are big questions that we're facing now. Donald Trump saying, make America great again, meaning great as against the rest of the world. He's not talking about America in isolation. He means America over and against, being great as an imperialist nation over and against the rest of the world. You know, they'll be looking to where they can exploit and where they can utilize their economic power to exploit or to subjugate, and being in competition with China and Russia and all the rest. We're in dangerous times, and Europe breaking up and throwing up more borders is a direction of more nationalism and more protectionism, and that means more racism.
We are just, I mean, a couple of people who actually were on the side of Britain leaving the EU have said, hang on a minute, what is Scotland doing? Why is Nicola Sturgeon calling for a referendum now? Where does that put Scotland?
Where, I mean, it's presenting, the choice in this situation is one of this hard Brexit, meaning that the government's actually prepared to throw away all relations with Europe, even the single market, like even the customs union, everything, in order to hold on to the one policy of blocking people from crossing the borders. It's not to cut off from trade, but to cut off people, they have to cut off trade, and they're actually prepared to do that. That's hard Brexit. That shows you how irrational the policy is and but how determined it is about immigration.
The government has not actually concluded on, the government is very hopeful about the negotiation that's going to be but beneficial to Britain and the rest of Europe.
They've done their best to hide it from any scrutiny. They wanted to go ahead with negotiations with no discussion and no scrutiny. And it took a Supreme Court to say, no, you actually have to talk about it in Parliament first. And the government fought for this like one sentence bill and tried to block and fight every possible amendment that could be put that might in any way guarantee anybody's rights who's already here. Or there was amendments about the single market and whatever the negotiations we still want to say in the single market. They blocked all of that. They wouldn't even protect the rights of people who are here because everything is up for trade, even human beings. Everything's a bargaining chip, even human beings. And that, I think, is where Sturgeon has made a smart move, like to say, we don't want to necessarily go down that path. Now that if that's what Brexit is, so we'll come back to the Scottish people and take a vote again.
Would you call a move that is likely to break Britain a smart move? Is that really smart?
But what choice is there in the sense, I mean, I don't accept this whole Brexit as being the example of democracy. And I think a one-off vote which was very polarized and narrowly took a decision, but also was done on the basis of blocking a whole number of people's votes and an awful lot of people not voting. But Scotland voted the opposite to England. And so how is that, you know, this is not a great example of democracy at all. It's not democratic to subjugate, to trample on the rights of minorities is never a democracy. But yeah, I mean, so now she's saying we will have a referendum in Scotland as to whether you stay in Britain and go down this route of hard Brexit or come out and trade with Europe. There are very few options given the railroad that Theresa May is pulling the country down.
Is it R or the votes? Because obviously it's the choice of the people. They voted to leave.
52% of the people who voted, who were allowed to vote, voted to leave.
Yes, still the choice of the people.
But they also didn't even vote on how or what that means. It's if there's a politician is elected as MP, they would be scrutinized from day one. There will be questions. Like, just because they were elected from a constituency does not remove the constituency's right to challenge them at every turn. And yet somehow with Brexit, we're supposed to just treat it like it is untouchable and all it means is leave. And so how that happens, when that happens, in what way, what is the rest of the outcome, none of which was on the ballot paper, we're just supposed to accept blindly. That is completely wrong.
There are 2 to 3 million British outside Britain. Do you think Theresa May will want to jeopardize the interests of these Britons? Trading, doing business, working in other countries in Europe. Will they shape all their interest in my wife negotiating as well, regardless of the number of other Europeans in Britain?
I mean, to be honest, you say that and the first thing I think of is the number of people whose futures are jeopardized already, who are British. I mean, like, jeopardized in the sense of the austerity program, the poverty agenda. It's costing people now. It's costing people's lives. You know, it's costing a young generation's future. And like I say, young people voted overwhelmingly the other way. Young people who are going to live the longest with the results of this voted against Brexit overwhelmingly.
Are you likely, do you see a second referendum?
I mean, they should be, because I just think that there's lots of people waking up to the circumstances of Brexit and would be changing their minds. I think there was a tremendous amount of spin and lies before the referendum happened. So it's one way to redress that question would be to have another referendum based on what actually this is, instead of the spin that we had before.
But would that be any time soon, even though the former prime ministers, John Major, Tony Blair, have all come out to say, look, this shouldn't be the end of this discussion. It shouldn't be like, no, we can't touch this again. But will they ever happen?
I mean, it can be stopped. And politics changes. I think we can learn that from last year and this year. Unexpected things in politics that you think are impossible today can be possible tomorrow. And that is being shown. But the concern I have is that it's got to be an initiative of anti-racist, conscious and active anti-racist, not just people who say, I'm not racist because I consider myself, but what does that mean in practice? How do you actually stand up for your fellow human beings' rights and dignity and respect? Because that's nowhere in Brexit. There isn't dignity and respect. We're already seeing they've reopened charter flights to Jamaica, more raids. People who in the past would have been able to win, I think that there's an attitude now where it's like, well, the will of the people is that all these outsiders go. And so it's even harder to fight through for your rights. So there's got to be a movement that is based on an anti-racist standpoint, coordinating and organizing itself and marching. So we did march on Saturday and we said, stop Brexit, Brexit is racist. And we got enormous amount of support. We spoke from the stage and people were really applauding because they see the link, Trump and Brexit, the moves to the right in the Netherlands, like you say, in France, the dangers of the really extreme right getting control, getting into power. We're going to be marching on Saturday, and it's called March for Europe. It's to do with the freedom of movement of people again. And so there will be a lot of EU citizens in the UK marching, and I'm pretty sure a lot have felt very disappointed at the results so far.
The Prime Minister just tweeted 5 minutes ago. She just tweeted now, and the tweet said, that's from number 10, says, as we leave the European Union, I will work to deliver a deal that was for the whole of the UK. As if she was watching this program. She just sent that tweet that we got now, 5 minutes ago.
Right, and
Look,
she
Tonya,
doesn't mean the whole of the UK.
As we leave the European Union, I will work to deliver a deal that's a tweet coming from number 10.
That's a deal for the privileged of the UK who she recognises as part of the society. I recognise people as part of the society, whether they have the papers or not. And anyway, of course, as a politician, you're going to say that. But politicians say a lot of things and then they U-turn. And then they could, you know, I don't think it will come as any surprise to anybody for all the promises her party made about protecting the NHS. It's in a crisis. I mean, we will hear that today and we will hear the excuses tomorrow. But it won't change the one path they're on, which is just to protect themselves, just to protect their class.
All right, this is how far we can go on the program. Tonya Bright, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks.
And thank you so much for taking your time to join us to discuss this raging issue about Britain and its future in the course of Brexit. And you want to find out more about the Prime Minister's tweet at number 10 gov. You can check it out at gov.uk.government.new Brexit deal. The Prime Minister just tweeted now 7 minutes ago, in the course of the discussion, as we leave the European Union, I will work to deliver a deal that was for the whole of the UK. We should trust her on that, shouldn't we?
I wouldn't trust her on anything. Not at all.
Antonia, thank you for coming on the show. It's a pleasure always having you join us on the show. Pleasure a lot. Thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks.
We're going to a very short break now, and when we return, I'll be bringing in my other guests. We'll be talking about the African identity, the failure of the slave masters. You don't need to go away. It's going to be interesting. Live Current Affairs television's program. Our focus on the program is to review and discuss issues around the diaspora community in the UK. The program offers you that unrestricted voice on issues affecting you in the UK. Join us live every Monday at 10 a.m. to 12 noon.